So it says we are live. I guess then we
Yeah,
are live. So
looks good.
yeah, at the usual 10 minutes after 4. So I think this is probably this is the new date, the new time that we're gonna just stick with. I think that works quite well.
Yep.
Anyways, it's already Tuesday again. Go figure. So welcome back to another episode of PKs on Air. This week it's just us. Just
Sorry for
Dominique and
that.
myself. No one else is gonna join us. I think it was nice as long as it lasted. Right, there were like a bunch of really cool guests over the last weeks. So this week is just the two of us, and we have some recent things that happened, but also we're gonna talk a bit about mobile first, mobile only, and kind of the entire situation around that, because obviously that's currently one of the bigger topics in the industry that where there's a lot of chatter about. So we thought it would be kind of worthwhile just kind of talking about that a bit and kind of giving a bit of like context around that. And yeah, so we kind of see how we get along with that. And we kind of, as always, looking forward to your questions. So if you just want to pop them in, need some clarification, by all means, please do. Before we get into it, Dominique, how's life in Berlin?
Yeah, it's quite not that exciting at the moment. At
Still the
least in
same,
Berlin.
huh?
Yeah, it's still the same. So
Unchanged.
Berlin is not that exciting as usual, of course.
Right.
But I would say in terms of PKs and internal things going on, it's a lot of things we are working on at the moment. A lot of new stuff coming up. And so that part at least is super interesting.
That part works.
Course.
Yeah, that's it.
That
True.
part
And
works.
I think Google keeps us busy, right? Not only our team, but
Definitely.
also the other teams. I mean, for those that kind of have been watching the other weeks, you probably have seen Julia, who kind of joined us a while ago, actually 2 weeks I think ago on the stream, where kind of she gave a bit of an overview on recent changes and things that happened in paid search. And equally, we had Paul for Facebook, iOS, specifically tracking changes. We had Sarah just last week, where we kind of talked a bit about B2B, specifically B2B content marketing. So yeah, there were like some really, really interesting kind of topics and guests that we had. So yeah, as you've been saying, like there's a lot of things going on, which I think is somewhat good and bad at the same. But what didn't really change is that we're still doing all of this, or at least most of it, right? Entirely virtual. I mean, for obvious reasons.
Yep.
But kind of have a couple of friends, obviously, also like around the globe. Specifically, in this case, I was a bit jealous about some of them being in Tel Aviv, where I saw that they could even go back to the bars now. So I think Tel Aviv,
didn't recognize that.
they I mean, of course, their like vaccination program was extremely fast in comparison to a lot of others. And yeah, so it seems that like if you at least those were like double vaccinated, it looked like they can go back out. So quite jealous, but also equally happy for them. So that's really cool. So I think it's gonna happen at some point. But the question just is, when will we find kind of like the German? When do we find the German efficiency? It's probably somewhere hidden. We have to yet uncover that again.
True. Yeah.
Let's just see. Let's just leave it with that. I think we shouldn't turn this into political discussion.
Please not. I'm so tired of that topic.
I agree. But what we will do though, because actually in 2 weeks' time, this is actually quite interesting, because out of this, for those that have been watching PKs on Air for a while, we kind of almost really a milestone that I thought we wouldn't have happening. But we have a birthday, because parties and stuff in Germany. So it's gonna be, of course, a virtual birthday, but we have a birthday episode coming up in 2 weeks' time. So kind of due to all of this pandemic nonsense, this is actually what kind of made us start like the early formats of PKs on Air, and we're gonna celebrate that. And I think I'm also hopefully I'm fine, but yeah, I'm fine to reveal probably the first guest joining us. So I'm really excited. Actually, we have a long article from him today around the topic of mobile first. So like that's actually pure coincidence, but none other than Mike King from Pullrank, a very good friend of mine, is joining us on the stream to celebrate and geek out a bit about digital marketing as well. So yeah, it shall be a quite interesting round. We also have Julia coming back, our very own Julia, kind of talking a bit about paid or bringing like more the paid search perspective to it. So yeah, it shall be good. Make sure to not miss that one. We had tons of fun for the Christmas episode, so I think that shall be good. That shall be good. Yeah, so I mean, virtual is probably also an interesting like a good kind of cliffhanger if you so will. So I did like I think we mentioned that the other episode, right? Like I did the virtual workshops because this week is actually normally we both Dominique would spend our week in Munich, right? I think if things would be normal, this is the week where we usually leave for Berlin on a Sunday or a Monday and then set up the booth like together with the team. And then be kind of in Munich usually until Thursday late. This is kind of how it usually went down, right? So for one of our, I think, favorite conferences of the year, which is ASMX Munich, right? And we're gonna have a kind of a more like in-depth session, I think, on like events in general. We also have Alex joining us next week on the stream, where kind of she's gonna share some of her experiences. She's been doing tons and tons and tons of events. With not only, but like most of you would probably recognize one of her former employers was SEMrush. So like she's going to share some of her thoughts and stuff that she's been doing, because I mean that team did a ton of events around the globe. So that shall be quite interesting. But yeah, so I had the workshops yesterday as well as today. So this is why I'm also a bit like a bit brain fried, to be honest. And I have to say that was interesting. I have to say that like I on purpose I only did like so it was scheduled to be like 3 hours. We could have had both days. We almost did 4, but yeah, I didn't want anyone spent like 8 hours on a Zoom call with me. I think this would have not gone down well. So yeah, kind of I kind of used the usual, well, not the usual, but like the normal like 8 hours format, and then kind of broke it into half and even like took some stuff out. So yes, I was more around like crawling and indexing and those types of things. And then today we had a bit more like, I wouldn't say special interest, but like we talked about web performance, about migrations, a bit more like the project things, as well as international. But yeah, so that was I think we talked about it as well on the stream in the past. Like I kind of stayed a bit away from like doing workshops, because somewhat I feel that like, at least for my type of workshop, it could be totally different. So again, just kind of share my experience and from those that I've been doing in the past. But like I think they just really live also from like the interaction and people kind of being together in a room, like really in a room, not in a Zoom room. And also from like the discussions that kind of happen on the side, etc., etc. So that somewhat is really hard to kind of keep happening also on a kind of virtual environment. So that's probably the downside of it. But I think overall was a lot of content. But if you're listening to
can imagine,
like 3 hours straight, then well. Yeah, that's but tough. That's tough.
Yeah, I can totally relate. So I didn't have like conference workshops, let's say, during the last months, but a lot of client workshops going on. So also during the last weeks, which
you also would normally do in person with the client, right, at the client premises,
exactly, together with the client and the teams, exactly. And yeah, it's a different feeling, of course. It's for me, it feels way more exhausting after it. So also the workshops were like between 2 and 3 hours. Yeah. And it's like it feels like talking forever. And after that 3 hours, it's like, wow, I'm completely like wasted. And that's
honestly, yesterday I was like in a long time, so I've been not drinking any alcohol. So that's yesterday evening I was like, I definitely need a drink. Like I was
today
really
you deserved
done.
it.
Yesterday was worse because it was the first time again, and this is funny. It's an experience actually that I made a couple of times in the past as well, also for in-person workshops. Like the first one is really challenging. Like once you've done that again, it's easy. At least for me, it's easy peasy. It's just like this kind of pressure that, well, not pressure, but like, well, I think just like the kind of constant tension, if you so will. And I think even with a certain routine, you still, I think it's also actually good to have it, but like you're not gonna lose it. So yeah, that was really, yesterday I was exhausted. Today it's fine. No, this one was in the morning, so it was even a bit better. Kind of from 9 till like close to 1, like 12:30. So but yeah, so this is the part that I really miss, like especially like I take a lot of value, and that was also like when we do kind of the surveys afterwards, like a lot of value from like the discussion, like the lunch break and whatnot. So I think this is a bit of a shame, really. But I mean, you said you guys are doing obviously like a lot of workshops, kind of virtual workshops as well. It's like any tools or tips that kind of just come to mind, where it's like, look, this is something that helped us a lot, which probably others can make use of as well. Like anything that comes to mind?
So I would say in general, my major take is that plan in breaks for at least after each hour. You should plan at least like 5 or 10 minutes, because you just lose the person you're speaking with or to. So this is one of my major takes. That you can never plan enough like short breaks, not too long. And then what I love to use whenever it comes to content marketing, or we try to work on something together during the workshop, I love to work with Miro. This is a tool which is mainly like a virtual whiteboard, I would say. So it's super interactive. You can share one board with all the attendees. You can have or prepare. So this is what I'm doing. I'm preparing my board before I start with the workshops. Having something like different kind of cards for brainstorming, or we want to discuss a process or something like that, or a workflow or something like that. Preparing that, then everybody can access that kind of boards and try to work together. You can set also like timers. That's great for having like ideations together, like setting a timer there for 10 or 5 minutes for each kind of ideation or brainstorming round, I would say. And then after 10 minutes, the board automatically closes, and then you can see all the results, and you can also see who is doing on or working on which kind of a part of the dashboard or the brainstorming board or mind map or whatever. So this one is pretty great for collaborative working and also for workshops, I think. And what else? I mean, for having the workshop itself, or for streaming, my favorite tool is Zoom. Pretty obvious. Together with clients, this is my go-to platform there. I preferred it more than Teams or something like this, to be honest. So I think that's basically it for
But me was it's a really good hint, actually. I mean, I'm obviously not using it as frequently as you guys are using it, but I recall we had a couple of sessions that we did together, and you're right. It brings back a bit of this like interactivity that you would have when you're kind of like using a board kind of like in a room, or like a kind of a flip chart or whatnot. So I think that's actually quite good hint.
That brings back a bit the feeling of we are doing something together and having not like the distance and sitting in front of a screen only.
Very true.
I think that's quite helpful.
Nice. So okay, I guess moving on to our kind of major or main topic, or however I want to call it, of the week. I think so. This entire situation, and maybe probably also need to kind of recap a couple of things, at least quickly on what happened, and then kind of I would say we just discuss some more recent changes. But I mean we all know that I think officially the statistics kind of came out 2015 or even earlier. I can't recall, to be very honest, when Google said, look, kind of we like, mobile traffic surpassed desktop and whatnot. So I think this is not really new, and I think this is also when they kind of first time talked about something that they called at the time mobile first indexing, right? And I recall sitting actually speaking and then sitting at a session at SMX Advanced in Seattle. That must have been 2017, and I think that was the first time when Google kind of publicly really went on stage talking about that project. And I think at that time it was Gary Irish from Google saying, "Look, like for us, this is what we want to do, but those are the major challenges." And he had a bunch of examples there, but like I think two things that he really addressed was one, like, look, we need to kind of revisit a lot of the old concepts, right? So let's say PageRank, because I mean that was meant for, or it has been built back in the day for like the kind of the desktop, if you so will, link graph, or with a desktop link graph in mind, right? Versus like linking on a kind of mobile web, if you would strictly separate that, that's a different story, right? There's probably less links, there's different types of links, etc., etc. So that was one of the things that he kind of threw out. Said, look, this is like a huge challenge for us. So essentially, you are asking us, or we decided to make over this solely desktop-based index, which was at the time, I think 18, 19 years, so like the past 20 years now. And we need to reevaluate and rethink a lot of the concepts, and that's going to be hard for us. So this is kind of when I saw them first time going really publicly on kind of record and say, look, this is what's happening there, and this is what you guys need to understand. So that I found quite fascinating in a way that they actually started sharing a project of that size very, very early on, right? And then I think.
Sorry. I just wanted to ask, what was your impression or your expectation after listening to that kind of session the first time?
Yeah, I felt at the time when they did it, it was like I could understand the reasoning, and I could understand why they'd be pushing for it, because like if you think about it from a user perspective, it did even make sense at the time, saying, look, I mean. And I think from a practical standpoint, this is like an experience that we all have had at some point. Like you search for something, you've been using your smartphone, you search for something, you got the result, you kind of tap on the result, you end up on a landing page, but you can't find, or you couldn't find what you actually have been looking for. Simply because of the fact that prior to this entire ordeal, like they were ranking the site, no matter what, solely based on the desktop content. And then there were some adjustments for mobile, but essentially, like the baseline was the desktop content, and usually I think when we built sites back in the day, and I think that included 2017 actually, we always did desktop first, and then mobile was kind of a sideline experience, oftentimes dumped down, less content, less functionality, or even with a different. Because sometimes you can even have a different intent for the same keyword, right, on a desktop versus a mobile site. Because on mobile you want to do something different, right? So. That kind of in my mind, and it's actually a good question, like that in my mind, like I felt it actually makes sense to go that direction, but equally I also was like a bit intrigued because I think like changing an index at that scale with that history is not a small project. And this is
scary,
this is also actually where it's quite funny, but that you didn't mention that, but like this is also where it already started going relatively quickly into a like wrong direction in terms of communication, because like the first thing that of course SEOs did was because they didn't really clarify, and this entire like desktop mobile situation that I described in the past was also not really well known. Like people were still assuming like they do some rankings on desktop, on some on mobile, but it was never the case. It was always just like desktop, and then this kind of knowledge was also not really publicly widely available, which led to another interesting discussion at the time. And even like I recall there were a bunch of tweets back in the day where it was like Google trying to clarify that obviously they only have one index and not a separate one for mobile, and that they will remain to have just one single index, right? So like this concept and the naming was really confusing, because it also was not really clear when they kind of went out with this announcement how they would actually crawl and what they would actually do. I think probably they didn't. I mean, so that's fair. Like they didn't even entirely know themselves at the time, right? So I think that was also a bit of the challenge, but it certainly didn't make the communication not really easier, and it brought in a bit of confusion. And I think also specifically one topic that we're seeing now, like where the discussion kind of moves from mobile first to like a mobile only situation, at least in terms of the communication. I think this was something that back in 2017 that did not really anticipate, even though this discussion with the tweet I recall, I'm just looking at a deck, was 2018, so it was relatively early on in the entire discussion. But going back to what happened then, of course, questions came, right? So one of the questions, because I think we all were living in this desktop-centered world, was, on mobile, there are some very common design elements, right? So like accordions, or you have a list of items where you have like a plus, and then you tap on it, but you don't leave the page. It just kind of opens and expands, right? So they expand the elements. Yeah, the flyouts, exactly. And we as SEOs have been taught that back in the day, like if you would do that on desktop, so there's content that somewhat requires user interaction before it's visible, then you would get less value out of that. So in terms of ranking, that meant back in the day for desktop, and that still does, since it's not there straight away, but you potentially have enough real estate to show it, then the kind of that essentially just means that you probably think it's less important. At least certainly, even if you wouldn't, Google would say, well, it's less important because there's interaction required. Therefore, you kind of have this, the disadvantage in rankings, let's phrase it that way. And so, of course, people were scared, right? Because there was like no explanation to that. So one of the first questions that came up is like, look, what's with those I would say very, very commonly known design elements that we just kind of talked about. And so Google started clarifying that, which of course was needed, right? But so this was one of the things that I that was of course bound to happen.
Interesting, I can remember exactly that time, because we in content marketing were also, whenever we have like concepts on holistic landing pages, we wanted to show a lot of content, and then wherever we started to have like the concepts, we were thinking about or considering what is going to happen with like the flyouts.
Yeah.
Right. So this is where have always been like a huge topic, like those hidden content questions. And then what happens when it goes to mobile? It's another question. Yeah, I see.
And you're right. I think another thing that I recall that we like a lot of discussions that we had in the past, where we ended up actually even building like this crazy JavaScript library, right? Where we had some clients where like the size didn't like really resize properly, and we had to kind of then also resize the assets that we were kind of embedding because sometimes they were externally hosted. So that was an interesting one. And I think these are all like those challenges that you have when you have one design pattern, but actually this thing is actually meant for something entirely else. So I think there was a lot of discussion around it, but kind of it slowed down a bit because also when they kind of start rolling out like mobile first indexing at the time, like their first kind of waves. Also a funny story on the side. I think that was it must have been 2018 if I'm not totally wrong. So I spoke at one of the international search summits, I think in Barcelona at the time. And so again, funny enough, like I met Gary like a lot of times those years. Like he, I think, was also speaking there. Like we had like a very small but really productive round of like Q&A, because like the ISS is like really, it's a small size, specifically tailored event to like international kind of SEO and SEO topics. So it was really cool, and he had like a lot of time to answer questions, which is quite rare. And so at the time, I think he said something like, "Well, we're gonna switch the sites over. I don't think we're gonna give you any type of like notification and whatnot. We're just gonna do it, right? It's a typical Google thing.
We're just gonna do it and see what happens."
And everyone was like, "Oh shit! Like this is not gonna be good. How do we find out?" And then people start poking around in log files and whatnot. So I mean, luckily that they kind of did listen to a lot of feedback, and they kind of introduced us notifications in Search Console. And by now, with the new Search Console, you even have like in settings, you can like see what's the primary crawler. I think what then happened at some point, for valid reasons, they said, look, if you launch a new domain, there's actually no sense to kind of still do this and then flip it over. So like all the new domains at a point kind of got mobile first switched, or just they were entirely mobile first, like as soon as Google discovered them the first time. So I think those were the things that happened then in the last years, up until a point where, that felt, for me at least personally, I felt a bit like they got stuck. So they flipped over, like I think by their own sayings, like half of the sites or even 2/3. I can't recall what the number was, but then nothing really happened anymore. So Google was like, yeah, we switched over like a significant amount of sites, not everyone else, and that was basically it, right? So I found that quite funny, and then you didn't hear from it for a while, up until like I think early 2020, where they said, look, so we're gonna also flip over the remaining sites, and that's like now the timeline is also why we have like this discussion now. Like we kind of said that we're gonna do that by March 2021. What they also did, and this is, I think, something worth mentioning, because I found that very significant. Actually, I think not many did pick up on it, but so Google never really went on record saying what they would actually like do or what they would recommend if you ask them for like how to build mobile desktop sites and relations, right? We do have, generally speaking, we have responsive sites. We still have, like, especially in larger corporates, we still see like mobile subdomains for various reasons, like legacy code, setups that are just hard to change. Some do like kind of dynamic solutions based on user agent or feature detection. I think there's various ways to do that. But they never really said, they said, look, everything is fine. This is what, that was the initial talk line, which, truth to be told, it was never really that fine. I mean, the responsive, and that's what changed in 2020. So they kind of finally went on record saying, look, responsive is actually the way to go. Because what the challenges that you have with all the other setups is that essentially content is different, right? Or can be different, not necessarily is different, but can be different. And one of the key slides that I've been also using in like a lot of presentations back in the day about the topic is that the one thing that's absolutely crucial is parity, so that you get like your stuff in order and synchronized. This is essentially what it comes down to, because I mean, it doesn't really matter if you have a desktop site or a mobile site. If the stuff is just one-on-one the same, well, chances are not much is going to happen. But if there's differences, and there usually are differences, especially with mobile subdomains, because, well, there's no schema markup, or there's different title tags, or there's less links or more links, or whatever the difference might be. This is where the trouble really starts. So like the non-parity of desktop versus mobile, versus if you're on responsive. I mean, still there can be differences, because if you resize the viewport, as we have just said, right, with the accordion, you might use it here, but you might not use it there. So some stuff might just happen a bit later. But overall, I think that the real deal is that it's significantly much closer together for responsive sites versus all the other setups. And in 2020, Google went on record and said, look, and I think the statement read something like, responsive web design, I just opened it up, but responsive web design serves kind of the same HTML on the same URL, regardless of the user's device, which is exactly what we're talking about, right? It doesn't matter if you have a smartphone or you have a web crawler. Same
doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. But it can render like the display differently based on the screen size, which is exactly what we're essentially talking about. So Google recommends responsive web design because it's the easiest design pattern to implement and maintain. And that I think was quite significant, because then finally people understood, well, with all the other setups, that might be issues. And fast forward to I think earlier this year, when we had the and this is where we actually maybe I can put them on the screen, where I think the event was, it was PubCon. No, it was actually last year. It was PubCon virtual last year still. Where is it? There we go. Yes, so there's PubCon. There's a tweet that happened, I think, whilst at PubCon. John Mueller from Google was speaking there, and so Adam Reamer, I think, summarized, said, look, John Mueller just verified that if you have anything on desktop but not on mobile, content, comments, reviews, those types of things, it will not be indexable starting March 2021. So if it's not on your mobile page, it will not count for indexing. And this kind of was what happened when they went back on record then end of last year. And that is a different understanding. So I looked because I wanted to be sure, but like I found some statements from the past, and also I actually used it in my decks like 2018, 2019 even, where it said it's fine. Well, if you don't need it, you don't need it, but there was never like this clear statement, and there's like a huge write-up that I also kind of have, I think here, yes, where like, it was never entirely clearly addressed, I would say. This is the same tweet again, where, where it says like when kind of they launched it as mobile first indexing, but and then in March, as I said, like they kind of announced, okay, look, we're gonna move the rest over. So this is all like said and done, but they never really kind of said, okay, this is this like the severeness in a way of like, let's drop desktop entirely. So yeah, the communication shifted a bit. However, I think if you come from this parity angle, and you would have done your homework previously, you would have just ensured anyhow that what is relevant for you is available on the mobile side. So it doesn't really matter. So I was a bit surprised, like, that there was this huge like upscream, and people were like, oh shit, like they're dropping desktop and whatnot. I mean, again, if you had done your homework previously and you would have just cared about getting what's relevant, certainly kind of included into the resolution for the mobile or smartphone user agents, it shouldn't change much. So this is kind of what it is really. And in reality, and this is the other funny thing that I found quite interesting actually, is that, like, I mean, we have done so many audits in the last years. I don't even know how many, but like we have, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe I missed the case, but like we have not seen any case where you would really say, look, this was solely and only because Google didn't manage you to flip over into an MFI setting and you have lost because of that. I think we have not had that case, and we didn't even look into any of those cases for clients or whatever. I mean, and I'm not saying we didn't change something in preparation for it. Sometimes that really was part of our job. But the fact of the matter is, like, when the switch happened, no damage done, which is again, like there's an article that I want to bring up in a second from none other than Mike, where he kind of goes in a bit of a different direction. I'm not saying he's wrong, but I just found it quite interesting. That there's this like huge discussion now. But anyhow, so where we are right now is that Google said, look, I mean, this is more, or like where people said, look, this is more like a mobile only indexing, not so much a kind of mobile first. And John kind of clarified it. So he said it has to be in the rendered or static or whatever. Like essentially, it has to be in the HTML to be indexed. That makes sense, right? If it's not there, well, how so, right? Yeah. So, and he said, look, himself, okay, it should be mobile only. But yeah, so this has been, and I think this was also kind of this summary from Barry, that it's not entirely new, just it was rephrased. But what I found really interesting, and this is a point that I wanted to make, because it goes, so this one here, where he says, yes, John told us earlier that there are bugs with m.dot URLs and mobile indexing. And this is actually interesting because, they went on record recommending responsive web design, responsive sites. And now all of a sudden it's kind of fine to have bugs on an m.dot, right? And it's even worse. It's even worse that, so there is, I don't know if I can find it that quickly. Let me see if it was in here. There was one article. I'm just trying to find where it was. It was even taken from a Google presentation where it says, look, we have bugs with m.dot subdomains sometimes, and it's fine. We're not gonna fix it. So I don't know where it was actually, but it has to be in some of the. Wasn't it in here? Anyhow, I find it and I will add it to the links. But yeah, it literally said something like, okay, we know about it, we can't fix it in the timeline. Maybe we fix it later. So I found that quite interesting, especially considering that I went on record saying that before. But anyways, yeah. So okay, fair enough. So this is where we are right now, and there's one resource, and I already kind of started scrolling through this monster, and I think we actually even had that in one of our previous episodes, actually, if I'm not totally wrong. But this is on trafficthinktank.com, which is kind of a private kind of SEO community, if you so will. So a good friend of mine is running that. So if you have any kind of, like, if you need an intro, let me know. But yeah, so this is actually a free resource, which is really cool. And so there's a whole and probably the most thorough write-up on like mobile first or mobile only, and some of the stuff that we talked about, but also specifically what you need to do and what you can do, kind of different types of setups, preparation. This is, again, they also kind of highlight that, similar to what I've been saying, parity is the biggest thing to get right. And then there's some very tactical or like hands-on approaches as to how to kind of audit that. There's various tools with that. most of the crawlers do it, Sidebulb or Write or Screaming Frog or whatever. So so like constant workflow for structured data, for how to set up, hreflang if you're on different kind of domains or subdomains, or have the mdot and whatnot. So really thorough. Like if you need one guide, I think this is probably the one that I would recommend. There's 2 other resources that are actually really good. The one is, they're both from Google themselves. So one in like the advanced SEO section on Search Central, they have actually a specific section here. It's still called mobile first indexing, but it's kind of best practice thing. It gives a bit of background, but also it kind of talks about some of the common like mistakes that people really make. So lazy loading for primary content is a good example, right? So of course, I mean, also from a performance standpoint, you don't want to lazy load stuff that's visible straight away. So like those kind of things are there. And then again, here this goes to parity, right? Same meta tags for mobile and desktop. I think you kind of know the drill by now. But this is a really good kind of guide to follow along with. And then I think this is actually the one that I was looking for. Perfect. Let me see if I can find it here. Yeah, see, there we go. I knew it. We're almost completely indexed, like everything now with the smartphone Googlebot. Content only visible on desktop will be ignored. All content must be reachable, blah, blah, blah. So this is like the first part that we talked about. And then the other slide, I think, is here. Yeah, there we go. So the m.dot mobile index bug, m.dot URLs may be visible on desktop search. You can redirect them, but that's about it.
That's it.
Great fix, great user experience here. So if you experience that,
awesome.
literally you're on your own. I think this is kind of what the statement is right now. But what to do, right? I found that equally interesting.
So true, yeah.
This is it. And so there's this one massive piece that Mike actually published. I think it was last week, right? Yeah, 16/11. Last week. And so he is kind of, and I'm not sure I fully agree, because I think my biggest thing, as I already stated, for the year, at least until now, it's probably going to be passage ranking and passage indexing and everything around that situation. But either way, he wrote actually a fantastic thing, and you can see it on the scroll bar. It is very, very, very long.
Oh wow!
But it's definitely worth a read. So essentially, his case, or the case that he's making. So I think Mike was also like contributing to the SEO chapter at the Web Almanac, and it's just really cool, because like some of the data points that they crunched were around differences of sites, or like the very minimum overlay of their content if you look at desktop versus mobile. So like from a link graph perspective, from kind of internal linking count. So here you could see like, okay, there's a chunk of links that are only on mobile, chunk of links that are only on desktop, etc., etc. Also word count that I was quite fascinated by. So like there's a massive apparently disparity on like the amount of content, which again probably makes sense if you think about
how
you consume, etc., right? So there's a whole bunch of really interesting data points in here. And then so I think Mike's kind of conclusion is, if you look into like the graph, the content like disparity, and as well as like all the other differences, that it might be bigger than we think it's going to be. Also kind of outlining a bit on like that most of the SEOs don't really test that well, which I agree, because I think the one very valid point that he's making is like we still see a lot of issues with people struggling to understand like the rendered version, so the JavaScript desktop version versus the desktop static version, like the HTML version of the desktop, right? So these are already two different ones. But if you do it correctly, you would actually have four, because you have a non-JavaScript for mobile, a JavaScript for mobile, a non-JavaScript for desktop, and a non-JavaScript for the web, so to say, or for desktop, which is very true. And they all can be different, right? Potentially, because JavaScript has an impact. So it's not only viewport, but the complexity actually increases if you kind of add or take away features, and those features actually come with or without JavaScript, right? And yeah, I mean, the rest is kind of going to the same direction, obviously looking at the kind of critical things such as meta tags, such as titles, etc., etc. And then he's kind of outlining an approach to like how to diagnose those differences, or like the parity issues, etc., which is all quite well known. This is stuff that we've been talking about for a while, right? JavaScript rendering, how you can do it with Screaming Frog, etc., etc. So if you need a guide on that, this is quite cool. But what he also did to make it a bit easier, and this is what I want to point out, so if you have yet to kind of deal with, it's like they put together like a mini tool. It's called Peredo. And it looks something like this. So essentially you can, it's free, right? It's linked here. It's, we can maybe use the screenshots from here. It's probably faster. But yeah, so it does like the comparison for all the different types of user agents with JavaScript, without JavaScript. And then it does like a diff check. So it gives you kind of like an overview of what's going on and what's wrong. And they do that for like 8 different versions of a site with like, in different settings. And then they kind of point out what's right, what's wrong, what's missing, and some nice graphs, etc. So this is something if you have not been switched over yet, if you're dealing with client sites, etc., this might be quite helpful. I mean, of course, you could also do that with any crawler of your choice, as he's like actually outlining himself above. So that's true, but of course, it's much more work if you need to do that 8 times or 4 times either way. You need to put it all together, etc., etc. Then it just takes a lot of time, and this does it at least for like the most critical things. Like at one glimpse, you just throw in URLs. You can even like you can upload URL lists, right? So you just post in a whole bunch of them, and then you just like kind of let it crawl, and then you kind of get the recommendations. You can drill it down. Like the resolution is a bit broken right now because I have it zoomed in, but you can kind of vertical scroll and then compare it, and you get like the difference in the markup. You can kind of select what you want to look at. Mobile, desktop. HTML with JavaScript, without JavaScript, for Googlebot, etc. So it's really helpful, and I think they did a phenomenal job on that, just to kind of spot differences, etc. So yeah, if you kind of having to deal with that still, I mean not necessarily still, but like if you have any sites that have not been switched over, apparently there are still some, then I think this is a very helpful tool to kind of just make it a bit easier. But other than that, I honestly think that I would not overly panic. I think as long as you figured out, if you figured out Perry, and if you have the crucial stuff there, then that's fine. But I mean, of course, there's also some things I would say that are a bit less obvious. One of them I actually mentioned already earlier, right? So like, it's not necessarily only about the technical things, right? It can also be conceptual issues. With conceptual issues, I mean, for example, that if you search for a certain keyword again on desktop versus on mobile, your intent, even can be an explicit, but can also be like implicit intents. That might be very different. So I think what's also worthwhile, not only figuring out the text setup itself, but it's also worthwhile, I think, understanding if you actually are still targeting the right keywords, if you like switching over the experience, if that makes any sense. So I think this is also something that a lot of people are missing. I mean, next to, again, basic stuff, is the site really mobile friendly, of course, right? Like all this stuff with interstitials and overlays, they're oftentimes even worse on mobile. So because they're bigger, they kind of take half of the screen real estate. So this is not necessarily only text stuff, but also like conceptual things, right? I mean, of course, you should go through your GSC and have a look at all the mobile like centric reports. I think this is clear, and of course, like do this parity check on a larger scale with a crawler. But yeah, I think conceptually, there's also some things that you just need to consider because the site might just somewhat work slightly different. I think this is very important to understand. So plus, and I think this is also kind of my last comment on like the conceptual side of things. What we also shouldn't forget is that the search results, obviously in Google, they look different as well. So you can't simply just one-on-one compare like CTR for certain keywords, right? Because the screen real estate might be entirely different. You might be pushed down, you might be higher up, you might have more attention due to, I don't know, like an image that you have on mobile, but you don't get it on desktop, etc. So it is, that is true. It's a bit of a different world, also conceptually. But then again, it essentially, in my mind, it in quotation mark only changes by device. It's not like really rocket science. It's just like you need to design it differently with a different approach. But yeah, so if there's any kind of help that you guys need out there, let us know. Happy to have a look.
Let us know.
Yeah, but don't go crazy. This is the same story as with Core Web Vitals. I agree with Mike though. I think this one is going to have more of an impact than kind of some added on web performance. That is for sure. Right. So I think this kind of wraps it up. This is all the questions. Kind of try to cover all the questions that we had beforehand. So I think all the points that I had on this. We're gonna put a quick recap on this to the PK's blog as always, where you will also find all the other ones. That's pa.ag/notes. Feel free to browse and just poke around. There's going to be also the video recaps of the and the videos itself of the episodes. And I think with that, we are switching off for the week. We're going to be back next week with, I think a lot of news from SMX. I'm really curious and excited to see what's going on there. Plus, we're going to talk about events in general, because if you're running events, planning on running events, attending events, either way, I think that episode is going to be quite interesting.
Definitely, yeah. Pretty excited about next week.
Yeah, it's gonna be good. I'm quite sure about that one. So see you all next week, 4 p.m. German time on Tuesday. We're gonna be back for another episode of PK Samir, and that's it. We're off.
Thanks
Bye-bye.
for watching. Bye bye.